Alright, welcome to today's lesson on management structures. So, what is a manager? Well, a manager is a person that is responsible for the work of other employees within the company. Their overall goal is to increase the performance of those employees. Now, as we saw before, today's organizations are existing in a dynamic environment. That means that managers themselves must also be dynamic in their response. They need to be flexible to the constantly changing needs of the people that make up their organization. This has given rise to a number of different trends in management today, including a number of things like the belief in human capital. Again, we saw that more and more companies are being reliant on intellectual capital. Managers need to be aware of the knowledge and expertise base of their employees and do what they can to try and retain that within their company. Another thing that's happened is a demise of command and control. The dynamic environment that we live in today requires a faster response time of the managers that are in the company. We've got an emphasis on teamwork, a less vertical hierarchy, so we've got more things happening on a horizontal level. This means there's more teamwork as a result of more talent there. We're trying to leverage that talent as best as we can by working together. An increased use of technology, as obviously new technologies lead to new opportunities within the company. There's a more informal workforce. Today's generation of employees coming forward have a different set of expectations of their job and their managers than they have had traditionally in the past. Things like there is more of an emphasis on the merit or skills of the employee as opposed to the seniority of the employee. Many employees today are expecting the environment to be much less formal than it has been in the past. And finally, there's a greater concern for work-life balance. Society today is much more complex than it has been historically, and this requires more flexibility by the management and the company to allow their employees to deal with conflicting demands that exist in their lives. Now, we also know that there are a variety of levels of management that you can have. The top of the chain is top management. So these are the people that, like the CEO or COO or vice presidents and so on, these are the people that establish the overall organizational objectives. They monitor the external environment and trends so they can focus on the threats to the company as a whole and allow the company to seize on any opportunities that are arising. They're responsible for creating the overall vision and mission of the company and ensuring that their employees move in that direction. The middle management is basically responsible for interpreting direction from the top management and then disseminating that information to the lower management beneath them. So these are positions such as a regional manager or divisional manager or a project manager. They're basically there to develop and implement all the action plans that fall in line with the overall vision of the company provided to them by the top management. Next, we have first-line management. Their sole job is to manage the operating employees, or in other words, to manage the overall workers of the company. They're directly responsible for the performance of those workers and those departments. Examples of this position would be things like supervisor, a foreperson, or an assistant manager. And then finally, the last level of management is an operative, and these people actually aren't managers. They're the only ones here that have no responsibility for overseeing the work of other people. There's no management role whatsoever. They are the employees that are working directly on the job at the task at hand. Now, traditionally, the hierarchy of work looks like a pyramid. So all of your workers are at the bottom, and they are reporting to the supervisors, who report to the middle managers, who report to the executives, and so on. The high-level managers are at the top of the pyramid. They make all the decisions and pass those instructions down to the lower levels. The lower-level managers' employees just carry out those instructions and strategies. All the information in this sense goes from the top down. Very little information or input is provided from those who are the lower levels, like the worker bees and supervisors. Now, the contemporary management model flips that on its head. So now, instead of the CEO and top management positions being at the very top, they are now at the bottom of the pyramid. This puts the focus on the employees, and actually many times there's another level here, which is the customer. So the customer comes first, they then go directly to the employees, who work their way to supervisors, and so on down the line. Now, in this situation, we've got a lot of communication happening in both directions. In fact, the jobs of the management below are merely there to support those of the positions above them. They're there to ensure that the right people have the right roles and are working to the best of their ability. No longer are they coming up with all the decisions and passing them down the line. It goes in both directions. Now, we also have different types of managers. So two types of managers we could have are line managers and staff managers. Line managers are responsible for working directly on things that contribute to production. These are examples of supervisors, plant managers, and so on, responsible for directly the product or the service being provided. The other is a staff manager. A staff manager works in a specialized area that is not directly related to the product or service being produced. These are things like accounting departments, human resource departments, legal departments, and so on. They are there to support the line managers and line workers of that company. We also have a difference between managers and administrators. This is a much simpler difference to see. Managers are essentially titles given to those people who work in a for-profit organization, a company that is working to make money for the owners or shareholders of that organization. Whereas administrators are typically in positions in non-profit organizations, charities, and those types of things. We also have functional and general managers. So a functional manager is responsible for one specific function within that company, one specific area. So the accounting manager or the engineering department or the marketing department. A general manager, often found in much smaller companies, is responsible for much more complex areas of the company. They may do multiple different things. So a department store manager would be perhaps responsible for the cashiers. They might be responsible for the sales displays and the marketing. They might be responsible for accounting things and so on. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is factors that affect the actual job that you have as a manager. And there are a variety of things that even though you might be a top manager in a different company, your job is very different based on the company you're in. So first of all, we're going to look at is the level of the organization. So obviously, each level of management spends a different amount of time on different tasks. So top managers spend different amounts of time doing things than low-level managers do. And we'll talk about those distinct differences in a later date. We've got profit versus non-profit organizations, and this is not going to necessarily affect the task itself, but it's going to affect the way that you perform your task. Each company, no matter whether they're profit or non-profit, needs to make money, but the reason for that money is different, and therefore your approach to gathering that money is different. If you're working with volunteers, your approach is going to be much different and your expectations much different than you're working with people who are specifically employees. Same as if you're working with consumers versus working with people who are donating money and resources to your company. Third is, where does your company exist? What country does your company exist in? A manager that works for a company in Japan is going to have very different economic, social, and cultural pressures on them than somebody who's working in Canada. And so their approach to the job and what they're going to do and the way they're going to motivate their employees will be very different based on those countries and borders and expectations. The size of the organization is also going to affect what you're going to do on the job as a manager. So small businesses, which is considered to be any company that has less than 500 employees, they're often independently owned and operated, and therefore the managers are going to take on a much more generic role. We don't have the big overall corporations with very specific departments. Okay? Each manager is now going to be responsible for the whole aspect of the company, and many times they're also responsible for actually fulfilling day-to-day operative type operations. Large businesses have many different managers, but each one of them has a much more specific function in a specific area of the company. Incidentally, in today's society, we actually have more and more emphasis on small businesses. Yes, we have a lot of large businesses, but they are typically extremely large and getting bigger. There aren't very many of them. There are much more of the small businesses around. And finally, we've got policy. Every company in each organization has a different idea how to effectively and efficiently run a business, and that's basically due to the opinions of those who are in the top management positions. So if your top manager has an idea of how something should be done, your role as a middle manager or line manager is going to be very different from someone else who has a totally different vision in another company somewhere else. That's it. That's all we have time for today. We'll see you in class tomorrow where we can practice what we've learned.